She swapped her baby with her billionaire best friend's baby just because she was poor. The sun on two worlds. The rain had finally ceased, leaving the Lagos sky a bruised, watercolor purple, bleeding into the first fiery hints of dawn. In the hushed, sterile sanctuary of the Golden Cross Private Hospital in Victoria Island, the air was cool, carrying only the faintest antiseptic scent and the soft hum of the air conditioner. Adesawa Okafor-Adelabu lay propped against a mountain of downy pillows, the silk of her custom pajamas cool against her skin. In her arms, swaddled in imported Swiss muslin, was her son, his tiny face, a perfect blend of her own fine features and her husband Toby's strong brow, was serene in sleep. She had named him Oluwadabaloba, God is King, return to me. But he would be Toby Jr. The weight of him, the solid, warm reality of his breath against her chest, filled her with a completeness that silenced the world. A single, perfect tear traced a path down her cheek, not of pain, but of a profound, soul-deep gratitude. Outside her soundproofed window, the Atlantic Ocean whispered secrets to the shore, and the first lights of the day's hustlers began to twinkle on the distant mainland. Here, all was peace, purchased and perfected. Less than 500 meters away, in the same hospital complex but existing in a different universe, the public maternity ward was a symphony of survival. Here, the air was thick and lived in, a potent blend of sweat, antiseptic, Dettol, and the underlying, metallic scent of blood. The ceiling fans groaned on their axis, pushing the humid air around in a futile effort. The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow on rows of beds separated by faded floral curtains. In one such bed, Chinelo Nello Mba trembled, the adrenaline of birth receding and leaving a vast, cold emptiness in its wake. She was slick with sweat, her cheap nylon nightgown sticking to her skin. The bundle in her arms was lighter than she'd imagined a baby could be. Her son. She had named him Chinedu, God leads. But as she looked down at his tiny face, puckered and sleeping fitfully, a leaden dread, colder than any hospital chill, settled in the pit of her stomach. It wasn't a lack of love, not exactly. It was a terrifying foresight, a preemptive grief. She saw in his fragile form the long queue at the public tap, the struggle for the next term's school fees, the gnawing hunger of a month stretched too thin. She saw Emeka's kind, tired eyes straining to provide. She saw the shadow of the rusted zinc roof of their agigunal apartment falling across his future. A nurse bustled over, her smile practiced but weary. "Oya, mama, try to breastfeed now. The baby must eat." Nello fumbled, her body aching, her mind 1,000 miles away. As the baby latched weakly, her eyes drifted across the crowded ward. Through a grimy window on the far side, she could just make out the gleaming, distinct wing of the private suites, its windows dark and serene. She is in there, Nello thought. Soa, in a room that probably smells of flowers, not struggle. Her son is wrapped in dreams, not this rough hospital blanket. The two women, bound by a friendship that had spanned decades and defied Lagos's brutal social stratification, had arrived at motherhood's threshold within an hour of each other. For Adesawa, it was the graceful, expected culmination of a charmed life, a new jewel for the family crown, a successor to the Adelabu legacy. The news was already being softly murmured into phones by her husband Toby, a call to his father in London, a message to her mother in Asakuro. Champagne, discreetly, would be chilling. For Chinelo, it was a deepening of the trench of responsibility. Emeka, who had spent the night on a plastic chair in the corridor, would soon have to return to the mechanic workshop under the bridge. Her mother would be waiting at home, ready to help, but also needing help herself. This child was a blessing, yes, but also another mouth, another body to clothe, another future to somehow carve out of the stubborn rock of their circumstances. As dawn broke properly, painting the sky in streaks of gold and orange, the sun did not discriminate. It touched the gleaming roof of the private wing and warmed the cracked concrete of the public ward in the same indifferent embrace. In her serene room, Adesawa drifted into a contented sleep, her son's crib beside her, a state-of-the-art monitor glowing softly. In the noisy ward, Chinello stared wide-eyed at the water stain on the ceiling above her, her son finally sleeping on her chest, the weight of him feeling less like a gift and more like a sentence. The same sun, the same hour, the same act of creation, yet two destinies, already worlds apart, were being swaddled in dramatically different cloth. And in Chinello's heart, a plan born of love, desperation, and a lifetime of comparing shadows began to beat with the rhythm of a second, secret heart. Roots in common ground. The street was called Mercy Lane, a name that held more hope than truth. It was a liminal space in the heart of Lagos, where the city's brutal economic sorting revealed its arbitrary seams. On one end stood a handful of gated compounds, like the Adelabu's Victory Mansion, a sprawling, two-story edifice with manicured hedges, a guard post, and the perpetually polished gleam of two black cars in the driveway. On the other end, leaning in on itself with weary familiarity, was a block of face-me-face-you apartments where the Mba family occupied a single room. Here, the air was a permanent potpourri of cooking smoke, drying laundry, and the faint, ever-present scent of the open drainage ditch that ran behind the buildings. It was here, 8 years before the hospital wards, that the foundation was laid. Adesawa, then just Suwa, was 8 years old and suffocating under the weight of good intentions. Her day had been a procession of tutors, French at 10, piano at noon, etiquette at 3. She had escaped to the compound's front gate, peering through the ornate iron bars at the vibrant, chaotic life on Mercy Lane. She watched, envious, as a group of children chased a half-deflated football, their laughter raw and untutored. One of them was Chinello. Her uniform, passed down from two older cousins, was a faded, grayish version of its original blue, the hem hastily let down. One strap of her backpack was mended with thick, clumsy thread. But her energy was boundless, her voice the loudest as she argued a goal with passionate, street-honed logic. The sight was a magnet. Slipping past the watchful but indulgent gate man, Ezekiel, Suwa stepped onto the warm, dusty tarmac of the lane. She stood there, a small, pristine figure in a pinafore dress and shiny Mary Janes, holding a bottle of Chivita she'd taken from the fridge. The football game stuttered to a halt. The children stared. Suwa was a known but distant entity, a princess behind the glass. Chinello was the first to break the silence, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. "Why you dey look us like film?" she challenged, hands on her hips. "I'm not looking like film," Suwa replied, her accent already polished by her private school. "I want to play." A boy snorted. "With those shoes? You go spoil him." Chinello's eyes, however, had gone straight to the bottle of juice. It was the big, expensive one. Suwa followed her gaze. Without a word, she walked up to Chinello, the only one who had addressed her directly, and held it out. "You can have it. I'm not thirsty." It was not an act of charity from on high, but a desperate offer of entry, a ticket to a world that seemed infinitely more real than her own. Chinello hesitated, her pride warring with a deep, craving thirst. Finally, she took it, her fingers brushing Suwa's. She didn't guzzle it. With the solemnity that belied her age, she took a single, measured sip, then passed it to the boy next to her. "Make everybody taste small," she decreed. That simple, shared act of governance over a bottle of juice dissolved the barrier. They played that day, Suwa's careful shoes kicked off, her stockings torn. Chinello taught her the rules of the street, how to argue a foul, how to dodge the occasional Danfo bus that careened down the lane, how to split a single puff-puff into 6 pieces so everyone got a taste. Suwa, in turn, shared stories from her books about talking animals and faraway castles, worlds Chinello listened to with rapt, imaginative hunger. Their friendship became the axis of Mercy Lane. In the afternoons, they would sit under the lone, stubborn mango tree that grew between the compound wall and the open gutter. Suwa would bring snacks from her home, buttery shortbread, chilled yogurt. Chinello would bring stories, the latest drama from the compound, the gossip from the market, tales of her teacher mother's clever students. Chinello's mother, Mama Nello, a woman whose face was lined with worry but whose eyes were gentle, would often invite Suwa in. The single room was a marvel of organized chaos, beds stacked high, a curtain separating the parents' space. She would give Suwa a slice of bread with thick, sweet ajij bread spread, treating her not as a little madam, but as another one of her many children. Suwa would sit on the low stool, feeling a warmth there that was absent in her own spacious, silent living room. Suwa's parents, Chief and Mrs. Adelabu, initially disapproved. "Those people are not your class, NWAM," her mother would say, frowning as Ezekiel brushed the dust from Suwa's uniform. "What do you even talk about with that girl?" "Everything, Mummy," Suwa would reply, her small voice firm. Chief Adelabu, a pragmatist, eventually shrugged. "Let her be. It is good for her to see how the other side lives. It builds character. Just ensure she takes her antibiotics." The judgment was never from the children. On that dusty street, under that mango tree, they were simply Chi and Suwa. Chinello was the strategist, the protector, the one with street-smart solutions. Suwa was the dreamer, the diplomat, the one with access to magical things like ice cubes and colored pencils. They built a world of their own, where Suwa's privilege was not a wall, but a shared resource, a bigger bottle of Fanta to split, a new storybook to read aloud. And Chinello's resilience was not a burden, but a superpower Suwa deeply admired. They swore, with the fierce, unshakable conviction of children, to be best friends forever. They sealed it with a pact, pricking their thumbs with a safety pin Chinello borrowed from her mother's sewing kit and pressing them together under the mango tree. "Blood sisters," Chinello declared. "For life, no matter where." They meant it absolutely. They could not yet conceive of the forces, the diverging schools, the orbiting planets of different social galaxies, the slow, insidious drip of envy that would one day strain to break a bond forged in the simple, sun-dusted soil of Mercy Lane. That day, all that mattered was the shared juice, the shared laugh, and the profound, unspoken understanding that each possessed something the other lacked. And in that exchange, they were both made whole. The Great Divergence. The mango tree pact held strong through the last, golden haze of primary school. But the system that was Lagos, and indeed Nigeria, had a machinery in place for sorting children, a machinery that now rumbled to life for the two friends. The letter arrived on thick, cream-colored paper, embossed with a crest. Adesawa had been accepted into Greensprings School, Lekki. It was a foregone conclusion, part of the Adelabu life script. Her parents celebrated not the achievement, but the proper progression. A new, more sophisticated uniform was ordered, a crisp blazer, a pleated tartan skirt. Her suitcase was a small, hard-shelled thing of glossy lavender. For Chinello, the transition was a quiet, paper-filled struggle. Her stellar results earned her a place at the prestigious Queen's College, Yaba, but it was a bittersweet victory. The acceptance letter, a flimsy photocopy, came with a long list of requirements and fees that made her teacher mother, Mama Nello, sigh deeply, the sound filling their single room. There were uniforms to buy new, no hand-me-downs would suffice here. Textbooks that were specific and expensive, boarding house supplies. A scholarship covered the tuition, but the incidental costs loomed like a mountain. The day Suwa was driven away in the family's Range Rover to her new boarding house in Lekki was the day Chinello walked the long, dusty mile to the motor park to take a crowded bus to Yaba. Suwa waved from behind tinted glass, her face pressed to the window, already looking lonely. Chinello waved back, her heart a tight knot of pride and panic, clutching a plastic bag containing her things. Their worlds, once overlapping on Mercy Lane, now began to orbit different suns. Sua's sun, Green Springs, was a manicured ecosystem of aspiration. Her classmates were children of senators, oil executives, and billionaires. Friendship was often a transactional prelude to future networking. She learned to dissect Shakespeare, but also to discern the subtle hierarchy between old money, like hers, and new. Her holidays were no longer just an Asakoro. They were summers in London, skiing trips to Switzerland, photos in front of the Eiffel Tower sent to a Nokia phone she knew Chinello could rarely afford to credit. She met Toke Adenusi, whose father owned half of the oil blocks in the Niger Delta, and Lola, whose family's law firm was a Lagos institution. Their conversations were peppered with global references. "When we were in Santorini, my dad's pilot said." Sua adapted, her accent acquiring a polished, almost transatlantic sheen. Yet, in the quiet of her dorm at night, she would scroll through her phone, past the glossy pics, to the simple, text-heavy messages from Chinello, a tether to something authentic. Chinello's son, Queen's College, was a different kind of pressure cooker, one of sheer, relentless academic excellence amidst shared scarcity. Her brilliance shone even brighter here, but it was a hard, glittering thing. She shared a cramped dorm room with 5 other girls, all similarly brilliant and similarly burdened. They pooled sanitary pads, shared single textbooks, and studied under galong lights after prep to save on personal torch batteries. Chinello's world became one of intricate calculations: how to stretch her feeding allowance to last the term, how to mend her one good uniform so the fraying wasn't obvious, how to write the best essay with the least amount of expensive paper. Her holidays were spent not in Paris, but in Ajagunal, helping her mother grade endless piles of exercise books, selling pure water on the side to contribute to the next term's incidentals. She was respected, even feared, for her sharp mind and sharper tongue, but a deep-seated resentment began to simmer, not at her friends at school, but at the invisible, monolithic them who lived the life Sua now casually described. Their connection became digital, a fragile bridge across a widening canyon. "Sua, from a hotel in Dubai, EJ, this place is too much. Everything is gold. Miss our mango tree. How's QC? Chinello, from the QC dorm, battery at 3% QC is war. But I'm winning. Gold no be only for Dubai, my A in chemistry is also gold. Mango tree dry since you leave. Sua, after a disappointing date with a boring air, these boys are so empty. All they talk about is their father's money. Chinello, after confronting a teacher who tried to extort her for better marks, at least their father get money. My own matter now by force. You can afford empty, me I need full, even if not of stress." The exchanges were still loving, still rooted in their old shorthand, but a new texture had emerged, a slight edge in Chinello's texts, a wistful, guilty distance in Sua's. Sua sent money sometimes, for data or something sweet, and Chinello accepted, her gratitude laced with a growing, shameful humiliation. She was no longer just Sua's street-smart equal. In this new dynamic, she was slowly becoming a beneficiary. The divergence reached its apex at university. Sua, following the script, went to Harvard Business School. Her Instagram became a stream of fall foliage, library halls that looked like cathedrals, and group pics with future world changers. Chinello, against all odds, secured admission to study law at the University of Lagos. But the week before resumption, Mama Nello suffered a severe stroke. The medical bills swallowed the university money whole. Chinello watched, helpless, as her dream of becoming a lawyer, her ticket to truly bridging the gap, evaporated. She deferred her admission, a polite word for surrender, and took her mother's old spot selling secondhand clothes in Oshodi Market. When Sua video called from her Cambridge apartment, gushing about a challenging corporate finance class, she found Chinello in her dimly lit room, sorting through piles of Okirika jeans, the sound of a generator roaring in the background. EJ, look at you. How's Unilag? Chinello forced a bright smile. School is fino. Just reading. The lie was a stone in her throat. She could not bear to utter the truth, to make her towering struggle a pitiful footnote in Sua's grand narrative. They still loved each other, fiercely, but the great divergence was complete. One was being groomed to inherit the levers of power and capital. The other was being schooled, day by day, in the brutal arithmetic of survival. They were both getting educated, but the curriculum was devastatingly different. Mercy Lane was now not just a physical distance, but a historical one, a shared country they could both remember, but could no longer inhabit together. Parallel love stories. Time, in its relentless march, carried the women into their late 20s. The girlhood packed under the mango tree had hardened into an adult bond, tempered by distance and divergence, but still fundamentally intact. And as if orchestrated by a capricious fate with a taste for symmetry, love found them both in the same sun-drenched season. For Adesawa, it began at a charity gala for childhood cancer at the Eco Hotel. The air was a cloud of expensive perfume and soft, purposeful chatter. She was there out of duty, representing the Adelabu Foundation, draped in a stunning, bespoke midnight blue gown from a London atelier. He was Toby Adeyemi, the only son of the Adeyemi banking dynasty. He wasn't just handsome. He carried an aura of effortless, inherited authority. He found her by the champagne fountain, slightly apart from the crowd, scrolling discreetly on her phone. She had been texting Chinello about the absurd canapes. Bored by your own party? He asked, his voice a warm, confident baritone. Sua looked up, a defensive retort on her lips, but it died when she met his eyes. They were intelligent, assessing, but held a glint of shared amusement. Is it that obvious? Only to the professionally bored, he smiled, offering her a fresh flute. Toby Adeyemi, I've been watching you avoid the chairman of the stock exchange for 10 minutes. It's been the most entertaining thing here. Their courtship was a Lagos society column fantasy. Private dinners on the terraces of Sky Restaurant, where the city glittered below like a spilled jewel box. Weekend escapes to the Obudu Mountain Resort, then later to Paris, where he proposed at the base of the Trocadero with a flawless emerald-cut diamond. It was polished, predictable in its luxury, and deeply comforting to her parents. Toby was not just a match, he was a merger. He understood her world, its languages, and its unspoken rules. He appreciated her beauty, her grace, her Harvard-honed mind. Their love felt like the safe, inevitable next chapter of a well-written novel. For Chinello, love arrived on a cloud of dust and the scent of engine oil. It was a sweltering afternoon in Ajagunal. She was hauling a heavy sack of new, second-hand, stock to her market stall when the strap broke, scattering blouses across the muddy path. A wave of hot, frustrated tears pricked her eyes, a luxury she rarely allowed herself. Oya, peace, peace. Nobi war. The voice was calm, practical. She looked up to see a man kneeling, already gathering the garments with strong, grease-stained hands. He was Emeka Nwosu, a mechanic from the workshop 3 streets over. She'd seen him before, a quiet, solid presence under the hood of various dying cars. He wasn't handsome in Toby's chiseled way. His face was kind, his build sturdy, his smile genuine but sparing. "Thank you," Chinello muttered, scrambling to help. He didn't just hand her the clothes. He retied the sack with a piece of tough wire from his pocket, creating a new, stronger handle. "This one go hold, Am," he said, handing it over. Too much stress for one person's shoulder. That simple act of unsolicited, practical care was a balm. Their courtship was built in the interstices of a demanding life. It was packets of suya shared on a low wall as the sun set, the spicy meat a feast. It was him walking her home after late nights at the market, his presence a silent shield against the neighborhood's rougher edges. It was conversations not about portfolios or philanthropy, But about the cost of genuine spark plugs, her mother's improving health, their shared dream of a two-bedroom apartment with constant water. His proposal came not on a mountain or under a Parisian sky, but on her rusty balcony under a tapestry of stars barely visible through the hazy Lagos glow. He had no ring, only a folded piece of paper. It was a careful, handwritten budget, showing his savings plan for a simple wedding and a deposit on that two-bedroom. "I no get diamond, Nello," he said, his voice thick with earnest emotion. "But I get this plan, and I get this heart, full for you. If you agree, we go build them together. Step by step." She said yes, crying tears that washed away the day's grime and a lifetime of feeling second best. His love didn't promise to lift her into another world. It promised to build a better one with her, right where they stood. The two women shared their news on the same day, in a frenetic WhatsApp call. "EJ," he proposed, in Paris. Sua's face was radiant, the Eiffel Tower glittering in the background of her video. Chinello, sitting in her dark room with a smile so wide it hurt, whispered, "Sua? Emeka too?" He asked me. For a moment, there was pure, synchronous joy. They screamed and laughed, two girls from Mercy Lane once more, celebrating a shared milestone. But as the details tumbled out, the old, silent comparator awoke in Chinello's heart. Paris, a diamond, a sky restaurant, balcony, a budget. Suya, Suwa, sensing the shift in her friend's eyes, quickly added, "Nello, I'm so happy for you. Emeka is a good man, a real man," and she meant it. But the juxtaposition was stark, hanging in the digital space between them. That night, lying next to the softly snoring Emeka, Chinello stared at the ceiling. She loved him, fiercely, truly, but a treacherous thought slithered in. Why is her happily ever after a fairy tale, and mine a business plan? She thought of Sua's future mansion, her children who would want for nothing. She thought of the child she might one day have with Emeka, fighting for space in a room like this one. The love was parallel, but the trajectories, she saw with a sinking heart, were not. Her joy was now intricately, painfully woven with a thread of deep-seated envy, a silent shadow in the bright new light of her engagement. The cracks in the canvas. The parallel joy of their engagements soon gave way to the stark, practical realities of planning a wedding in Lagos, a city where matrimony was as much a public statement of status as it was a private covenant. It was here, in the thick of fabric swatches, venue brochures, and caterer tastings, that the first hairline fractures in Chinello's heart began to widen into visible, aching cracks. For Adesawa, planning was a graceful delegation. She had a wedding planner, Kimi, a diminutive woman with the organizational prowess of a military general, and a black book thicker than a Bible. Meetings were held in the sun-drenched lounge of Sua's parents' Ikoyi home. Decisions were made between sips of hibiscus tea. The florist from Amsterdam has confirmed for the arch. He suggests a mix of pharaoh roses and white orchids, Kimi would say, tapping her iPad. "Lovely," Sua would reply, glancing at Toby, who would give a distracted, approving nod from behind his Financial Times. Her trousseau was being assembled by a designer in Milan, based on measurements taken in her living room. The honeymoon was a choice between a private island in the Seychelles or a safari lodge in Rwanda. Her primary stress was aesthetic, not arithmetic. For Chinello, planning was a daily exercise in high-stakes calculus. Every item on the list, from the aso-ebi fabric to the smallest jar of kola nut for the elders, was a variable in a tight, unforgiving equation. She and Emeka sat at their rickety table late into the night, a single bulb swinging overhead, a notebook between them filled with columns of figures that never quite added up. "If we use Mama Chitty's daughter as the caterer instead of the hotel," Emeka mused, his brow furrowed, "we save 200,000 naira. But your auntie Nkechi will complain that the rice is not international standard. Let her complain." Chinello snapped, her nerves frayed. "Is she paying?" The words came out harsher than she intended. She saw the slight flinch in Emika's eyes and instantly regretted it. This wasn't his fault. It was the universe's. Her visits to Suwa's planning sessions, initially undertaken with excitement, became a special kind of torture. She'd sit on the plush sofa, sipping tea that cost more than her weekly market stock, listening to debates about live bands versus string quartets. She'd hold a sample of Suwa's lace, a Belgian Lever's lace so delicate and expensive it felt like holding a cloud, then think of the stiff, affordable Chinese lace she'd chosen for her own dress, already bought and paid for. One afternoon, the contrast reached its peak. Suwa was flipping through a leather-bound album of invitation designs, heavy cardstock, gold foil, wax seals. What do you think, EJ? The cream with the silver lining, or the pearl white with the embossed monogram? Chinello looked at the samples, then thought of the simple, flat-printed cards she'd ordered from the printer in Alaba, a tenth of the price. They're both beautiful, she said, her voice flat. Suwa, attuned to her friend's moods, put the album down. She waited until Kemi and Toby had drifted to the other side of the room to discuss table settings. Nello, she said softly, reaching for her hand. Talk to me. Is it Emika? Is it the plans? The kindness undid her. Chinello's eyes filled with hot, humiliating tears. It's everything, Suwa. It's the canopy versus the Intercontinental. It's the plastic chairs versus the Chiavari ones. It's knowing that my big day will be a topic of pity, not admiration. The confession, once started, tumbled out. Emika is killing himself. He's taking on extra repairs, working nights. And it will still look cheap next to yours. Suwa's heart ached. She saw not envy in that moment, but a profound, wounded pride. This was her chi, her strategist, her protector, feeling defeated by a world Suwa navigated with ease. A few days later, Suwa drove to Ajagunal herself, a move that made her driver nervous. She found Chinello in her stall, fiercely haggling with a customer over the price of a pair of trousers. When the customer left, Suwa approached. Come, she said, leading a confused Chinello to a nearby bucateria. Over plates of steaming umla and yudu, Suwa slid a thick, plain envelope across the sticky table. What is this? It's for the photography, and the hall, and whatever else you need to make it feel like your day, not the day you could afford. Chinello's fingers recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. Suwa, I can't. You can. You will. Suwa's voice was gentle but unyielding. This is not a loan. This is not charity. This is me, your friend, refusing to stand beside you on a day where you are worrying about the price of the cake instead of the meaning of the vows. Please, Nello, let me do this. For us. The war inside Chinello was violent. Pride, shame, gratitude, and a deep, corrosive resentment battled. She saw the genuine love in Suwa's eyes, but she also heard the echo of her own mother's voice. Nothing is ever free, my daughter. Everything has a price. What was the price of this? Would she forever be the poor friend who needed rescuing? But the vision of Emika's tired eyes, of the modest canopy, of a wedding album filled with photos taken by her cousin's shaky phone, it was too much. Her shoulders slumped in surrender. She took the envelope, its weight a condemnation and a salvation. Thank you, Suwa, she whispered, tears dripping into her soup. God will bless you. But as she clutched the money, the poisonous seed that had been sown by a lifetime of comparison found rich, fertile soil. The voice in her head, no longer just a whisper, was now a clear, cold statement. She can buy her perfect day, and she can buy you yours. Her love is a solution. Yours is a problem. She loved Suwa, but in that moment, she also hated her a little. And she hated herself more for needing the very thing that proved the gulf between them was not just wide, but fundamentally unbridgeable by effort or love alone. The crack was no longer hairline. It was a chasm, and Chinello was standing on the wrong side, holding an envelope that felt like a ticket to a wedding and a receipt for her own dignity. A twisted resolution. The weddings came and went, captured in two different lenses of Lagos life. Suwa's was a society event splashed across the pages of Hello Nigeria, a symphony of white orchids, a 12-tier cake, and a performance by a famous Fuji star. Chinelos, elevated by the secret funding, was a vibrant, heartfelt celebration in a proper hall with a good photographer. The community buzzed about how Nello had done well for herself, a testament to her and Emeka's hard work. Only the two women knew the hidden subsidy, a knowledge that lay between them like a silent, expensive ghost. They settled into the rhythm of new marriage. Suwa in her Lekki Phase 1 mansion with a house help and a gardener, navigating the soft ennui of a life where every material need was anticipated. Chinello in her slightly better two-bedroom apartment in a less chaotic part of Ajigunal, the walls still thin, but now with a small, humming fridge. They still talked, but the texture of their lives had coarsened the fabric of their conversations. Suwa's complaints about her interior decorator's delays met with Chinello's tense silence about a looming rent increase. Then, the final, fateful symmetry. They discovered they were pregnant within a month of each other. For Suwa, the news was met with a celebratory dinner at Sky Restaurant. Toby beamed, already discussing schools in the UK. Her mother booked her with the top gynecologist at the African Integrative Hospital, a man who had delivered the children of governors. The nursery, a sunlit room overlooking the manicured garden, was entrusted to an interior designer with a theme of safari chic. Her pregnancy was documented in soft-focus maternity shoots, her skin glowing from expensive prenatal supplements and weekly spa appointments. For Chinello, the news was a complex tremor of joy and profound terror. Emeka held her, his smile wide, but his eyes immediately clouded with calculation. Her prenatal care was at the crowded General Hospital, where she queued for hours on hard benches, her patient card growing thick with entries. The nursery was a corner of their bedroom, where Emeka promised to build a crib. Her prenatal supplements were the government-provided folic acid and iron tablets, often out of stock. Her visits to Suwa's home, once her escape, became a monthly pilgrimage into a parallel universe of motherhood. She would sit in the airy, beautifully appointed living room, her own belly swelling under a second-hand maternity dress, and watch Suwa unwrap gifts from abroad, a Swedish baby bouncer, a set of organic cotton onesies from Paris, a solid silver rattle. "Look at this, EJ," Suwa said one afternoon, holding up a tiny, impossibly soft cashmere blanket. "Toby's aunt sent it from Scotland. Isn't it ridiculous? He'll outgrow it in a minute." Chinello reached out to touch it. The texture was like nothing she had ever felt, a cloud, a whisper of unimaginable privilege. She thought of the stack of old towels and wrappers she was preparing to use as nappies. The comparison was a physical blow. "It's beautiful," she managed to say, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. The plan didn't arrive fully formed. It grew in the dark, fertile soil of her mounting despair. It started as a dark fantasy during one of those visits, watching Suwa's house help carefully fold the tiny cashmere blanket. What if my child could have this? The thought was fleeting, shocking. She batted it away, but it returned, stronger. During her long bus rides to the market, as she felt her baby kick, she would think of Suwa's child, yet unborn, already guaranteed a passport to a world of ease. As she argued with a landlord over a leaking roof, she thought of the sturdy, dry safety of Suwa's mansion. The fantasy began to crystallize into a scenario, then a possibility, and finally, a grim, determined resolve. It wasn't just envy. It was a perverted, sacrificial love. She looked at her own life, a constant, grinding struggle against lack. She loved Emeka, but their love was a fortress against the world, not a key to its treasures. She could not bear the thought of her child, her brilliant, beautiful child, starting life on the back foot, in the same race she had run and lost before it even began. If I can't cross the bridge, the logic twisted in her mind, my blood can. My son can. One night, Lying awake next to a sleeping Emika, the plan locked into place with the cold finality of a vault door closing. They would be in the same hospital. Suwa, in her private suite, would be well cared for, likely asleep after delivery. The chaos of the public ward was its own cloak. A switch would be simple, quick, a mother's ultimate sacrifice, to give up the joy of raising her own child so that child could have everything she never could. She would raise Suwa's child, the heir, as her own. She would ensure he was healthy, alive. That was her duty. Her own son would have the Adelabu name, the Adelabu fortune, the Adelabu future. It was monstrous. She knew it, in a deep, shrieking part of her soul that she forcibly silenced. She coded the plan in a narrative of martyrdom. I am not stealing. I am giving. I am giving him a life. The fact that it required stealing another woman's child, that it was a profound betrayal of the one person who had never betrayed her, was a cost she brutally reasoned away. Suwa would still have a child to love. She would never know. She had so much. She would never miss this one thing. By the time the first contraction gripped her, a false alarm that sent Emika into a panic, Chinello's heart was a hardened, secret thing. The love for her unborn child had mutated into a fierce, desperate determination to exile him into a better life. She packed her hospital bag with grim purpose, her hands steady. She was no longer just a pregnant woman. She was a strategist executing the most critical operation of her life. The crack in the canvas had become a tear, and through it, Chinello had decided to push not just a baby, but a terrible, irreversible crime. The swamp. The storm that broke over Lagos that Tuesday was not just meteorological. It felt like a cosmic drumroll for the drama unfolding inside the Golden Cross Hospital. Rain lashed the windows of the private wing, a violent percussion against the glass, while in the public ward, a leak in the ceiling over bed 12 dripped a steady, syncopated counterbeat into a plastic bucket. Adesawa's labor was a managed, serene crisis. In her private suite, soft lighting replaced the harsh fluorescence. A dedicated midwife and her esteemed obstetrician, Dr. Idris, murmured encouragement. Toby, having been gently but firmly banished to the adjoining lounge after nearly fainting at the first sight of medical equipment, paced on plush carpet, his anxiety soothed by the very expense of his surroundings. Suwa's pain was real, intense, but it was surrounded by a buffer of epidural magic and calm expertise. When her son finally arrived, his cry was a strong, clear declarative statement in the quiet room. He was placed on her chest, a robust baby with a thick thatch of jet black hair, his skin a glowing, healthy brown. Alyawada Baloba, she whispered, exhaustion and elation merging into a perfect, tearful peace. She was asleep within the hour, the baby in a transparent bassinet beside her, a silent monitor blinking a steady, green reassurance. In the public ward, Chinello's war was fought on a different front. The air was thick with the sounds of other women's pain, moans, sharp cries, fervent prayers in Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa. A single overworked nurse moved between curtains. Emika, allowed to stay, held her hand, his face a mask of shared agony. There were no drugs to take the edge off, only grit and a terrifying, primal focus. When her son emerged, he was smaller, his cry more of a reedy protest against the harshness of the world he was entering. The birthmark, a tiny, perfect crescent moon on his inner left thigh, was noted perfunctorily by the nurse. Chinidu, Chinello breathed when Emika placed him on her. The love that flooded her was immediately and violently at war with her plan. He was hers. He was beautiful. He felt like a part of her soul made external. For a long, trembling moment, she wanted to abandon everything, to hold him and never let go. But then the ward's reality intruded. A woman 2 beds over wailed in fresh pain. The leaky bucket overflowed, and a harried orderly cursed. She looked at Shinidu's tiny face, and instead of seeing her son, she saw the queue for immunization, the struggle for school fees, the relentless Lagos sun on a long walk for water. She saw Emika's future etched with deeper lines of worry. Her resolve, hardened over months of bitter rumination, clamped down like a vice, crushing the fleeting instinct to keep him. The hours crept by. The storm outside began to fade into a damp, post-midnight hush. In the private wing, the night nurse did her final check on Suwa and the baby. Finding them both in deep sleep, she retreated to her station with a cup of tea, lulled by the quiet and the rhythmic beep of the monitors. In the public ward, a semblance of exhausted rest had fallen. Emika, shattered, had finally been persuaded to go home and rest, promising to return at first light with proper food. Chinello lay perfectly still, every sense hyper-alert. The plan required a precise, terrible choreography. When the night nurse passed her curtain on a routine round, Chinello pretended to be asleep. She waited until the footsteps faded. Then, moving with a slowness that made her muscles scream, she sat up. Her body ached, a raw, hollowed-out feeling. She looked down at Chinidu, sleeping in a plastic hospital bassinet by her bed. Her heart gave one last, furious lurch of protest. She leaned down and pressed her lips to his forehead, inhaling his scent, her scent, milk, and life. It was a goodbye. "I am doing this for you," she whispered, a lie and a truth twisted together. "You will be a king." She wrapped him tightly in his cheap, thin blanket, making a small bundle. Slipping her feet into her plastic bathroom slippers, she padded out of the curtained area. The corridor to the private wing was a tunnel of polished linoleum and eerie silence, a world away from the communal struggle she had left. Each step was an eternity, the slap of her slippers echoing in her ears like a guilty heartbeat. She passed a poster about breastfeeding benefits, the smiling mother's face a mockery. Sua's door was slightly ajar. Chinello pushed it open, the sound a whisper of air. The room was dim, lit only by a small nightlight. There was Suwa, her best friend, her sister in spirit, deeply asleep, her face smoothed of all its usual gracious animation, looking young and vulnerable. And there, in an expensive, wheeled bassinet with a mobile of stars above it, was the other baby, Toby Jr. Her legs almost gave way. This was the point of no return. To look at Sua's sleeping, trusting face and do this was an abomination. But the engine of her envy and her twisted love was too powerful. She moved on autopilot. She approached the bassinet. The baby inside, Sua's son, her own flesh and blood's rival, was sleeping soundly, his cheeks full, his blanket a soft, merino wool. For a horrifying second, she hated him. Hated his peace, his assured future. With hands that had no feeling, she reached in and lifted him. He was heavier than Chinidu. He stirred, made a small snuffling sound, but did not wake. She placed Chinidu, her own son, into the luxurious bassinet. The swap was jarringly simple. Her child in cloud-soft wool, Sua's child in rough cotton against her chest. She turned and fled. The walk back was a blur, a nightmare in reverse. She slipped back into her curtained cubicle, her heart hammering against her ribs so violently she feared it would wake the entire ward. She placed the stolen baby, the real Toby Jr., now to be her Chinidu, into her plastic bassinet. He whimpered, his face scrunching. This time, when she looked at him, she did not see a baby. She saw a transaction. She saw the key to her own child's future. She saw the living, breathing evidence of her sin. She lay back on the thin pillow, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, which had spread in the shape of a continent she would never visit. The deed was done. The threads of two lives had been violently cut and reknotted in the dark. In the serene room down the hall, her biological son slept under a mobile of stars, heir to a kingdom. In the noisy ward, the heir to that kingdom slept on a plastic mattress, his destiny now one of struggle. And Chinello, the architect of it all, was hollowed out. A mother who had just committed the ultimate act of motherhood and the ultimate act of betrayal in the same breath. left with nothing but the chilling silence of a plan executed and a love now forever poisoned. Mothering a ghost. The dawn after the swap was a study in dissonant normalcy. In the private suite, sunlight streamed through the blinds, painting stripes of gold on the polished floor. Adesawa awoke, her body aching but her spirit buoyant. She turned her head, and there he was, her son. The baby in the bassinet beside her stirred, his face still sleepy, his features delicate. A wave of pure, unadulterated love washed over her, so powerful it stole her breath. "Good morning, my little king," she whispered, her voice hoarse. She reached out a finger, and his tiny hand, so perfect, wrapped around it with a surprising strength. "Look at you, Toby Jr.," she cooed to the baby who was, in truth, Chinedu. "You have your daddy's nose." He did not. He had Chinello's father's nose, a fact lost in the haze of her joy. She marveled at his quiet, observant nature, his large, watchful eyes that seemed to take in the whole room. "He's so thoughtful, Toby," she said to her husband later. "So gentle." It felt like a reflection of her own best qualities. Her motherhood was an immediate, seamless garment. It fit perfectly, beautifully. She was discharged into a world of preparation. The safari chic nursery awaited, and Toby Jr., Chinedu, was its perfect, serene centerpiece. A hired nanny, Gloria, was gentle and competent. Suwa spent hours just holding him, reading to him, her heart swelling with a protectiveness that felt primal and right. When he cried, it was a signal swiftly answered. When he smiled his first gummy smile, she cried, convinced it was the most miraculous event in human history. Her love was a sun, warm and constant, shining on the child she believed was her own. Across the city, in the cramped two-bedroom in Ajagunal, Chinello was discharged into a different reality. She walked through her own front door carrying the stolen baby, the real Toby Jr., now permanently branded in her mind as Chinedu. Emeka hovered, his face etched with a new, profound tenderness as he looked at the bundle in her arms. "Our son," he said, his voice thick. "Welcome home, Chinedu." The name was a knife in Chinello's heart. Our son. The words were a lie she had to live. She forced a smile that felt like a crack in clay. Yes, our son. The love she had felt in that first, unguarded moment after his birth was now inaccessible, buried under a mountain of calculation and guilt. When she looked at this baby, she did not see her child. She saw a living, breathing placeholder. She saw Sua's eyes in his face. She saw the easy life he had been born into, the life he was supposed to be living, which only highlighted the meagerness of the one she was providing. A corrosive resentment, aimed at fate but landing squarely on the infant, began to seep into her every interaction. Her motherhood was a performance, a grim duty. When he cried, a robust, demanding sound that spoke of his hardy lineage, she would often let him cry. "He's just colicky," she would tell a concerned Emeka, her voice flat. "Let him tire himself out." She would stare at the wall as the wails continued, her jaw tight, imagining her real son in a silent, air-conditioned nursery, being soothed instantly. She was meticulous with his physical care. This child was an asset, a guarantee. She fed him, but sometimes not on time, her mind distracted by the grocery budget or a missed payment. She changed him, but without the coos and smiles Suwa lavished on her baby. She bathed him quickly, efficiently, her touch clinical. Emeka noticed the chill. "Nello," he said one evening, watching her put the baby down after a feed with none of the usual cuddling. "Your heart, it is far away. Is it the stress? Do you not feel well?" He meant postpartum depression. The term was whispered in their community. "I'm fine, Emeka," she would snap, the guilt making her defensive. "Just tired. Motherhood is not all lullabies and powder." She would then retreat into a brittle silence, leaving him confused and worried. At night, lying awake, she would listen to the baby's breathing. The sound should have been a comfort. Instead, it was a reminder. That is not your son. Your son is Nleki. You were keeping his rival alive. The child beside her was a ghost, the ghost of the privileged life she coveted, haunting her own home. She was not raising a son. She was babysitting a future, tending to a hostage in a war she had declared on destiny itself. Her arms, when they held him, felt empty even when they were full. She was mothering a phantom, and in the process, she was becoming a ghost herself, a hollow woman going through the motions, her real heart and soul orbiting a mansion in Lekki, where her true child was being loved in her stead. Visits of agony. The visits began a month after the births, a ritual born of habit and a deep, unspoken obligation. For Adesawa, it was a genuine joy tinged with a growing, vague concern. For Chinelo, it was a meticulously planned torture, a necessary pilgrimage to the shrine of her own sin. She would prepare for hours. She would dress the baby, her baby, the one she thought of as Chinidu but who was Toby Jr., in the best outfit she owned, a gift from Suwa. She would pack the cheap diaper bag with military precision, ensuring nothing looked too shabby. The journey from Ajagunal to Lekki Phase 1 was an epic in itself. A crowded Danfo bus to the island, then an Okada ride, the baby clutched tightly to her chest, the roar of the bike engine and the blur of luxury cars a jarring prelude to her destination. Arriving at the Adelabu Mansion's gates was always a small humiliation. The stern-faced security guard would eye her and the Okada driver with suspicion before buzzing the house. "Madam Chinelo is here," he'd announce into the intercom, his tone implying she was an anomaly. The gates would swing open, revealing the impossibly green lawn, the silent fountain, the sheer, intimidating scale of it all. Suwa would greet her at the door, radiant in her leisure wear, smelling of lavender and baby powder. "EJ, you made it. Come in, Baiko." She'd usher her into the cool, vast living room, where the air itself felt expensive. And then, the ritual would unfold. First, the inspection. Suwa would coo over the baby in Chinelo's arms. "Kai, Chinidu is growing. Oh, look at those cheeks." She'd take him, her touch gentle, her smile warm. Chinelo would watch, her stomach a knot of tangled emotions. She was assessing her son's rival, checking for health, for weight. Was he thriving? He was. He was robust, solid. A part of her was satisfied. Her plan was working, the asset was secure. Another part seethed. That vitality is my son's birthright, being wasted here. Then, the exchange. Suwa would hand Chinidu back and say, "Let me go get Toby Jr., he just woke from his nap." She would return, carrying the other baby, the real Chinidu, her son. He was always serene, dressed in clothes so soft they seemed to glow. He had a quiet, thoughtful gaze that Suwa adored. "He's so calm. This one," Suwa would say, nuzzling him. "Not like his father at all." This was the core of Chinelo's agony. She would take her own biological son into her arms. The feel of him, the weight, the scent, it triggered a primal, screaming recognition in every cell of her body that she had to violently suppress. Her arms would ache to crush him to her, to weep into his hair, to whisper her terrible secret and beg forgiveness. Instead, she held him stiffly, offering a wooden smile. "He looks happy," she'd manage. "Oh, he is." Suwa would gush, completely misinterpreting her friend's stiffness as awe. "He loves his mobile." And Gloria sings to him. "He's just the sweetest." Every word was a lash. His mobile. Gloria. Sweetest. Chinelo would look around the room, at the educational toys already accumulating, at the wall of professional newborn photos, at the plush rug meant for tummy time. She would think of the single, squeaky toy she'd bought for the baby at home, of the noise from the neighboring apartments that served as his lullaby, of her own tense, silent care. The conversations between the women grew strained. Suwa would talk about sleep regression and which brand of organic wipes was best. Chinelo would offer monosyllabic replies, her mind screaming. Sometimes, Suwa would try to bridge the gap. "How is it, EJ? Really? Emeka helping?" Suwa asked once, her eyes soft with concern. It's fine, Chanello would say, her voice a monotone. We are managing. The gulf between managing and Sua's experience was an ocean she couldn't begin to describe. The visits always ended the same way. Chanello would hand back the serene baby, her son, with a heart tearing in two. Sua would hand back the robust baby, her son, with a cheerful, "See you next week." Safe journey. The journey home was worse than the arrival. The Okada ride felt reckless, the Danfo bus claustrophobic. She would clutch the baby, Toby Jr., close, but now the contact felt like a contamination. She would look down at his face, now subtly morphing to resemble Emeka more, and feel a surge of revulsion. You are here, taking up space, while my flesh and blood is over there, calling another woman mummy. She wasn't visiting her friend. She was conducting surveillance. She was checking on her investment. She was worshiping at the altar of the life she had given away and punishing herself and the innocent child in her arms for the crime of not being the right one. Each visit was a fresh layer of mortar on the wall between her and her own humanity, a wall she was building brick by jealous, agonizing brick, all under the warm, uncomprehending gaze of her best friend. The sickness. The first cough was a dry, insignificant thing. Chanello noticed it when the baby, the one she called Chinidu, the real Toby Jr., was about 18 months old. It was the Harmattan season, and a fine, red dust from the Sahara coated everything in Ajagunal, seeping under doors and into small lungs. She dismissed it. Dust, she thought, offering him a little extra water. But the cough didn't leave with the dust. It lingered, settling into his chest with a wet, stubborn grip. It was a deep, rattling sound that seemed too large for his small frame. His usual robust cries became wheezy, labored efforts. He grew listless, his cheeks, once plump, losing their roundness. Emeka was the first to sound the alarm. Nello, this cough is not ordinary. Look at him. He's not playing. We need to see a doctor. A doctor. The word sparked a panic in Chanello that went beyond normal maternal worry. A doctor meant questions, examinations. It meant attention focused on this child. But beneath the panic was a colder, sharper fear. This is Sua's son. If anything happens to him. The thought was unfinished, a cliff's edge she couldn't look over. Her entire scheme, her sacrifice, hinged on this child's health, not his happiness. Let's try Agbo first, she insisted, referring to the traditional herbal concoctions. She bought bitter brews from the local herbalist, forcing them down the toddler's throat as he cried and spluttered. She rubbed mentholated balm on his chest, the sharp smell filling their small room. The cough would ease for a day, then return with a vengeance. Meanwhile, her visits to Sua's mansion became unbearable exercises in surreal contrast. She would arrive, her own anxiety a live wire under her skin, to find her biological son, the child being raised as Toby Jr., in perfect health. He was toddling now, chasing a soft, multicolored ball across the pristine rug, his laughter clear and strong. He had a little pushwalker made of smooth, varnished wood. He was thriving. How is Chinidu? Sua would ask, noticing the dark circles under Chanello's eyes. You look tired, EJ. He has a small cough, Chanello would mutter, her eyes glued to her own son, who was now being lifted into Sua's arms for a cuddle. The Harmattan. You must take care of it, oh, Sua said, her voice full of a concern that felt like acid on a wound. These things can go to the chest. Do you need a pediatrician's contact? Mine is excellent. The offer was a dagger. We are managing, Chanello would repeat, her mantra of pride and secrecy now a prison. Back in Ajagunal, the management was failing. The cough worsened, evolving into a fever that burned through the child day and night. His breathing became a shallow, rapid pant. Emeka, his face etched with a fear Chanello had never seen, finally put his foot down. No more Agbo. We are going to the hospital. Now. The general hospital was a nightmare of queues and despair. They sat for hours on hard benches, the child burning up in Chanello's arms. When they finally saw a doctor, an overworked young man with tired eyes, he listened to the boy's chest and his expression tightened. Pneumonia. Quite advanced. He needs to be admitted. We need to start antibiotics and oxygen. Admitted. The words sent a fresh, electric jolt of terror through Chinello. It was exposure. It was a bill they couldn't afford. It was this child, the center of her terrible secret, under bright lights and scrutiny. She called Suwa. It was the only thing she could think to do. Her voice, when she spoke, was stripped of all its usual defensive pride, thin and cracked with a genuine panic she could no longer hide. Suwa, it's Chinidu. He's very sick. The hospital, they want to admit him. The bill. There was no hesitation on the other end. Which hospital? I'm coming right now. Don't worry about the bill. Just focus on him. Within the hour, Suwa and Toby arrived. Their presence in the chaotic public hospital was like a royal visit. Toby, with quiet authority, spoke to administrators. Money changed hands discreetly. The child was moved to a slightly better, semi-private ward. The best available doctor was summoned. Suwa sat with Chinello, holding her hand, her face pale with worry for the little boy she believed was her best friend's son. "Thank you," Chinello whispered, tears of sheer, undiluted terror finally falling. But they were not tears of gratitude for the money or the help. They were tears of primordial fear. She watched as nurses hooked Suwa's son up to monitors, as an oxygen mask was placed over his face. She watched Suwa gently stroke his hair, murmuring, "Be strong, NWAM. Be strong." In that sterile, beeping room, Chinello's carefully constructed world of secrets and swapped destinies began to fracture. The sickness wasn't just in the child's lungs. It was in the very foundation of her plan. Her jealous design had placed this innocent life in a path of vulnerability, and now the universe was demanding a reckoning. As she watched the lines on the monitor dance erratically, a single, devastating truth echoed in the hollow of her soul. This is my fault. And if he dies, I have not just lost a child. I have murdered Suwas. The last breath. The semi-private room in the general hospital became a claustrophobic theater where the final act of Chinello's deception played out under the harsh, unblinking glare of fluorescent lights. The air, thick with the smell of antiseptic and despair, hummed with the sound of machines, a relentless, electronic heartbeat for the little boy fighting in the bed. Suwa had transformed into a general of mercy. She dismissed the idea of moving him to her private hospital. "There's no time," she'd said, her voice firm with a fear-driven clarity. Instead, she imported the care. A top pediatric pulmonologist from the African Integrative Hospital now visited twice daily, his expensive loafers clicking on the linoleum, his brow furrowed as he reviewed charts and adjusted for drips that contained medicines not on the hospital's standard formulary. An oxygen concentrator, sleek and whirring quietly, had replaced the noisy hospital tank. Chinello was a ghost in the corner. She watched it all from a plastic chair that seemed to swallow her whole. She watched Suwa, who had taken a leave from her life, sitting for hours by the bed, reading children's books in a soft, steady voice to the unresponsive child. She watched Toby make urgent calls in the hallway, his voice a low, commanding murmur. She watched Emeka, his large, calloused hands gently adjusting the blanket over the tiny form, his prayers a continuous, whispered stream in Igbo. His faith was a quiet, desperate thing. Her own faith had died the night of the swap. The child, her Chinidu, Suwa's Toby Jr., was disappearing. The robust frame was now a fragile collection of angles under the sheet. His skin had taken on a waxy, translucent hue. The only signs of life were the terrifying dance of the lines on the cardiac monitor and the slow, mechanical rise and fall of his chest forced by the oxygen. The crescent moon birthmark on his thigh, the one true signature of his identity, seemed like a cruel, forgotten tattoo. The doctor took Suwa and Toby aside on the third day. Chinello, from her chair, could see their bodies tense. She saw Suwa's hand fly to her mouth, saw Toby's shoulders slump. The words drifted over, fragmented but clear enough. Very advanced, resistance to the antibiotics, organs under stress. A coldness seeped into Chinello's bones, a coldness deeper than any air conditioner could produce. This was no longer a sickness, it was a countdown. Her plan, conceived in envy and executed in darkness, was now culminating in a sterile, public deathbed. She had wanted to give her son a life of health and wealth. Instead, she had delivered Sua's son to a grim, premature end in a public ward, albeit one dressed with private money. The irony was a grotesque, living thing in the room with them. On the fifth night, the end began. The monitor's beeping, which had become the soundtrack of their vigil, grew erratic. Alarms, soft but insistent, chimed at the nurse's station. The doctor was summoned. Sua stood frozen by the bed, her hand clutching the child's small, limp one. "He's cold," she whispered, her voice breaking. "His hand is so cold." Emeka had pulled Chinello from her chair, his arm around her shoulders, but she was rigid, unfeeling. She watched as the medical team moved with a quiet urgency. She saw the doctor look at Sua and give a small, grave shake of his head. It was not a question of intervention anymore. It was a question of moments. The child's breathing hitched, a shallow, struggling gasp. Then another, longer pause. Sua let out a small, choked sound. And then there was stillness. A profound, absolute stillness that seemed to swallow the hum of the machines, the distant noises of the hospital, the very air from the room. The green line on the monitor flattened into a relentless, unforgiving horizontal streak, emitting a single, continuous tone that pierced the silence. Beep. Time fractured. Sua's knees buckled. Toby caught her, his own face ashen, as she dissolved into silent, shuddering sobs, her body curling in on itself as if trying to contain an unimaginable pain. Emeka let out a low moan, like a wounded animal, and buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking. But Chinello simply stared. She stared at the small, still form on the bed. She stared at the flat green line. The sound of the alarm was not in her ears. It was inside her skull, a scream that had been building for 2 years. This was the sound of her son's stolen future flatlining. This was the sound of her own soul's execution. The meticulously constructed wall of her lies, her jealousy, her twisted sacrifice, shattered under the weight of that single, endless tone. All the calculations, all the resentful comparisons, all the bitter justifications evaporated, leaving only the raw, horrific truth. A child was dead. Her child was dead. The boy she had borne, neglected, and used as a pawn had just lost his only fight. The dam holding back her sanity, already cracked by the sickness, now burst completely. The flatline was not an end, it was a trigger. As Sua wept for the son she believed she had lost, Chinello opened her mouth, and the confession, rancid and monstrous, tore from the deepest, blackest part of her being. It was not a whisper. It was a raw, deafening scream that ripped through the room of grief, louder than the alarm, more final than the flatline. "He's not yours." The wail tore through the sterile silence, a raw, animal sound that seemed to stop even the relentless beep of the flatlining monitor. Every head snapped toward Chinello. She was no longer a ghost in the corner. She was a convulsing monument to unraveled sanity, her eyes wide with a terror that had finally found its voice. "He's not yours," she screamed again, the words tearing her throat. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at the small, still body on the bed, then whipped it towards Sua, who stared, her grief momentarily shocked into paralysis. "The dead boy." Chinello gasped, her chest heaving. "He's not yours. He's mine. I switched them. I switched the babies." The room froze. Toby's arms tightened around a stupefied Sua. Emeka lowered his hands from his face, his expression one of pure, uncomprehending horror. The doctor and nurses stood transfixed. The confession poured out then, not as a plea, but as a torrent of poisoned truth, a lifetime of festering jealousy erupting like a geyser. "You have always been rich from day one," she sobbed, her voice jagged with hysteria. "People always see you first. They see your clothes, your car, before they see you. And they see my struggle before they see me. I just wanted my son, my Chinidu, to have your life." She was shaking violently, snot and tears streaming down her face. "I wanted him to have what I could never give him. I gave him to you. That one." She pointed a wild, shaking finger at her own biological son, the child thriving in Lekki, who existed only in the phantom space of her words. "That one in my house. That is yours." The silence that followed was more profound than any noise. The flatline's alarm was switched off, leaving a vacuum. Sua's face was a mask of shifting horrors, the raw pain of loss morphing into the dizzying nausea of betrayal, then into a dawning, frantic, impossible hope that cut through the grief like a shard of ice. Her voice, when it came, was a threadbare whisper, torn from a place deeper than sorrow. "Where?" She swallowed, her eyes locked on Chinello's deranged face. "Where's my son?" Chinello, her energy spent, slumped against the wall, a broken doll. Her voice dropped to a haunted mumble. "At home. The boy you think is Chinidu is your Toby Jr." In that moment, the axis of their world shifted. The dead child was no longer Sua's son. The living child was no longer Chinello's. Grief, identity, and motherhood were violently upended, leaving a wasteland of truth more desolate than the death they had just witnessed. The flatline had been the end of a child's life, but the confession was the beginning of a far more complicated death, the death of a friendship, the death of truth, and the death of two women's understanding of who they were and who their children would ever be. The reckoning. The silence in the wake of Chinello's confession was not peaceful. It was the stunned, heavy quiet after an explosion, where the ringing in the ears is louder than any sound. The hospital room, once a chapel of focused grief, was now a crime scene littered with emotional shrapnel. Sua pulled away from Toby as if his touch had turned to fire. She stared at Chinello, but she wasn't seeing her friend of 26 years. She was seeing a stranger who had performed a delicate, monstrous surgery on her life. The grief for the child on the bed, a child she had loved as her own for 2 years, was still there, a vast, black ocean inside her. But now, crashing over it was a tsunami of other emotions, a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical dissolution, and a wild, terrifying hope that made her heart hammer against her ribs. "Where?" The word was airless. She tried again, her voice gaining a sharp, desperate edge. "Where's my son?" Each word was a shard of glass. Chinello, collapsed against the wall, simply mumbled again, her eyes vacant, fixed on the tiny, sheet-covered mound on the bed. "Home. My house." Sua turned to Toby. His face, usually a mask of composed authority, was slack with shock. But at Sua's look, a look of primal, maternal command he had never seen before, he snapped into action. The businessman overrode the grieving father. He took out his phone, his movements stiff. He didn't call a driver. He called 2 of his most discreet, security-trained personal assistants. His instructions were clipped, precise. "Go to this address in Ajagunal. There is a little boy. Bring him. Immediately. Do not explain. Just bring him to the private wing of Golden Cross Hospital. Now." While he made the call, Sua took a step toward the bed. The doctor, sensing the seismic shift, moved to gently pull the sheet over the child's face. The child who was now, unbelievably, a stranger. Sua's hand shot out, stopping him. She stood over the small body, looking at the face she had kissed 1,000 times, the hair she had stroked. "This is not my son." The thought was impossible, vertigo-inducing. Her mind reeled, trying to recatalog every memory, every feeling, through this new, horrific lens. The love she had felt had been real, but its object had been a fiction. She felt herself fragmenting. Emeka was the broken pillar in the room. He had not moved from his spot. He looked from his wife, a shuddering, confessed monster, to the dead child who was not his, to his friend Suwa, who was now a figure of both immense pity and terrible accusation. The foundations of his own life, his marriage, his fatherhood, had been revealed as a stage set, a cheap facade. Nello, he whispered, the word containing a universe of pain, confusion, and a dawning, sickening disgust. What have you done? No one answered him. The wait was an agony worse than the vigil. It was a suspended animation where every second was a lifetime of imagined horrors. What if something happened to him there? What if he's sick too? What if he's scared? Suwa paced the small room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She couldn't look at Chinello. The sight of her was a physical assault. Nearly an hour later, Toby's phone buzzed. They're here, at the private entrance. They moved as a grim, silent procession. Suwa, Toby, a broken Emika pulling a near catatonic Chinello along. The walk through the hospital corridors felt like walking through a dream. They arrived at the same private wing where, 2 years before, the swap had taken place. The door to a family lounge was ajar. Inside, one of Toby's assistants stood, looking uncharacteristically awkward. And there, on a large, plush sofa, sat a little boy. He was smaller than the boy they had just lost. He was dressed in simple, clean but faded shorts and a t-shirt. He held a half-eaten biscuit one of the men had given him, his eyes wide and cautious, taking in the unfamiliar, opulent room. He was quiet, his gaze thoughtful, observant. Suwa stopped in the doorway, her hand flying to her mouth. The assistant spoke softly. Sir, Ma, he was with the grandmother. She was very confused. We just said we were friends of the family, that there was an emergency. Suwa didn't hear him. Her entire world had narrowed to the child on the sofa. She approached him slowly, as one would approach a startled bird. She knelt on the expensive carpet before him, her eyes level with his. The boy looked back at her. He had Suwa's own eyes. Not just the color, but the shape, the set. He had Toby's strong brow. And there, peeking from the leg of his shorts as he shifted, was a small, familiar mark. Suwa, with a trembling hand, gently pushed the fabric aside. The crescent moon, pale against his skin. The same mark the doctor had noted on her newborn son's thigh. The mark she had kissed 100 times in the bath, thinking it a cute, unique signature from God. A sound escaped her, a ragged mix of a sob and a gasp. The proof was incontrovertible. This quiet, watchful child, with her eyes in her husband's brow and the moon-shaped stamp of his true identity, was hers. Alyawada, she whispered, the name a question and a prayer. The boy stared at her, his little face serious. He didn't smile. He didn't reach for her. He simply looked, as if trying to place her. In that moment, the fractured pieces of Suwa's reality did not so much reassemble as they violently reconfigured. The love she had lavished on the dead child did not vanish. It transmuted. It became a heartbreaking, complex ghost. And a new, ferocious, and terrifyingly immediate love surged forward for this small, silent stranger who was her flesh and blood. She did not gather him into a crushing hug. The gulf between them, built over 2 years of raw motherhood, was too vast. Instead, she reached out and very gently, with infinite care, took his small, slightly sticky hand in both of hers. She held it, feeling the solid, real warmth of him, the tiny bones under his skin. Her son, alive. Here, the reckoning was complete. One child was dead. One child was found. 2 mothers had been unmade. And in this quiet room, one of them began, with trembling hands and a shattered heart, the impossible task of building a new one from the ruins. The severing. The family lounge in the private wing felt like a decompression chamber after the violence of the confession. The air was still, thick with the aftermath. The little boy, the real Toby Jr., the true Alyawada, sat quietly on the sofa, now holding a cup of juice Suwa had given him with hands that shook only slightly. He was a tiny island of bewildered calm in a sea of shattered adults. Emicus stood by the door, a statue of devastation. He looked at Chanello, who was curled in a distant armchair, her face hidden, her body making occasional, silent shudders. Then he looked at the boy on the sofa, the boy he had loved as his own, fed, bathed, worried over. Not mine. The two words echoed in the hollow of his chest, voiding 2 years of fatherhood. He took a step toward Chanello, perhaps to demand, to condemn, but the words wouldn't come. He simply turned and walked out of the room, the door clicking shut behind him with a sound of finality. Toby was on the phone again, his voice low and intense, making arrangements. A pediatrician was on the way to check the boy. Legal counsel was being alerted. The machinery of his world was engaging to manage this unmanageable crisis, to build a wall of order around the chaos. But in the center of the room, a quieter, more profound transaction was taking place. Sua still knelt on the floor before her son. She had not let go of his hand. She was studying him, drinking in every detail. The faint dusting of cocoa powder from the biscuit on his chin, the way his eyelashes curled, the serious, watchful expression that was so profoundly her. The ghost of the other child, the sweet, gentle boy she had raised, flitted at the edges of her vision, a beloved phantom. The grief for him was now a tangled knot with the horror of the betrayal and the dizzying shock of reclamation. She felt split in 3. Finally, she rose. Her legs were weak, but she stood straight. She turned her gaze from her son to the woman in the armchair. The friend, the sister, the monster. She walked over and stood before Chanello. The silence stretched, dense and painful. Chanello slowly raised her head. Her face was a ruined landscape of tears, snot, and shame. She looked up at Sua, expecting to see hatred, fury. She saw something worse, a profound, exhausted emptiness. Nello, Sua said. Her voice was calm, but it was the calm of a vast, frozen tundra. There was no warmth in it. Look at me. Chanello forced herself to meet Sua's eyes. What she saw there made her flinch. It was not the familiar warmth, the shared history, the inside jokes. It was the cold assessment of a stranger who has witnessed an atrocity. I forgive you. The words dropped into the silence, clear and heavy. They were not soft. They were not an absolution. They were a statement of fact, as cold and hard as a diamond. Chanello's breath hitched. Sua, I forgive you, Sua repeated, cutting her off. Not for you. Do not think for 1 second this is for you. She took a shallow breath, her composure a thin veneer over a world of pain. I do it for my own peace, so that the poison of what you have done does not live inside me and grow, so that I can look at my son, she gestured slightly toward the sofa, and not have your betrayal be the shadow over his life or mine. She took a step closer, her voice dropping, but gaining intensity. You didn't just steal my son, Nello. You murdered the child I loved for 2 years. You looked into my eyes every single week. You held your son in my house, and you let me love him, while you, her voice faltered for the first time, while you neglected mine. You broke a sacred trust. You violated the one pure thing we had. Chanello opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The excuses, the justifications born of envy, died before they could be born. They sounded hollow even in her own mind now. I will spend the rest of my life, Sua continued, her gaze unwavering, unraveling the love I gave to that other beautiful boy from the love I must now build for this one. I will wonder, every day, if the sickness that took him was because of the life you forced him into. You have given me a grief that has no name and a motherhood that is a minefield. For that, I cannot ever see you again. The finality of it was absolute. It was not shouted. It was decreed. You will not call me. You will not text me. You will not come near my home or my family ever again. Our friendship, that died today with the child who was not mine. Do you understand? Chanello could only nod, a tiny, broken movement. The severance was clean, surgical, and more devastating than any angry outburst. Suwa was not cutting off a limb in rage. She was calmly declaring a death and stating she would be the one to bury it. Suwa turned her back then. She walked away from the wreckage of their past, back toward the sofa, back toward the small, silent boy who was her future. She sat down beside him, not touching him yet, just being there. A chasm of wrong motherhood separated them, but it was a chasm she was determined to cross, one careful, loving step at a time. The severing was complete. The blood sisters of Mercy Lane were no more. The bridge built under the mango tree had been deliberately, irreparably blown apart from one side. All that remained for Chinelo was the echoing silence of exile and the crumbling rubble of the life she had built on a lie. For Suwa, there was the daunting, heartbreaking work of building something real from the ashes, starting with the small, warm hand of the son who had finally come home. The return to dust. Emeka did not go home that night. He walked the streets of Lagos for hours, a ghost moving through the indifferent, neon-lit night. The familiar sounds of the city, the blaring music from bars, the hiss of suya grills, the laughter of late-night Okada riders, all felt like they were coming from behind a thick pane of glass. The face of the dead child, who was not his son, flickered in his mind. The serious, quiet face of the living boy, who was also not his son, followed. And over them both, the twisted, tear-streaked face of his wife, confessing a sin so vast it had erased the man he thought he was. When he finally pushed open the door of their two-bedroom apartment in the fragile dawn light, it felt like walking into a stranger's home. The silence was a physical presence. Chinelo was there, sitting on the floor in the corner of the living room, her back against the wall, exactly as she had been in the hospital. She had not moved. She had not turned on a light. She just stared at the space where the plastic bassinet had once been. He stood in the doorway, his work boots coated in the grime of the city. He looked at her, this woman he had loved, whose determination he had admired, whose struggles he had shared. He saw now that the determination had been a cancer and the struggles had birthed a monster. Why? The single word scraped from his dry throat. She didn't look at him. I wanted better for him. For who? Emeka's voice rose, cracking with emotion. For which one? The one you killed with your neglect, or the one you gave away like a used wrapper? She flinched as if struck. For my son. For Chinedu. The dead one is Chinedu. He roared, the sound shocking in the small room. The one you gave away. The one you killed. The boy we buried will carry the name you stole for a ghost. He advanced into the room, his body trembling with a rage born of profound hurt. For 2 years, Nello, I watched you. I watched your heart be cold to that child. I made excuses for you. I thought it was stress or tiredness or, I don't know. I thought it was my fault for not providing enough. All that time, you were looking at him and seeing someone else's property. You were nursing a secret that was eating our family from the inside. He stopped in front of her, his shadow falling over her crumpled form. You are not the woman I married. That woman had pride. That woman had honesty, even in her suffering. You are a thief. And not just of a baby. You stole my fatherhood. You made me love a child who wasn't mine, and you made me neglect, in my heart, the one who was. The realization hit him as he said it, a new layer of anguish. In his focus on comforting her, on worrying about her distance, had he also failed the little boy who was Sua's? Had the chill from the mother infected the father, too? Chinelo finally looked up, her eyes pleading. Emeka, please. I was wrong. I was sick with jealousy. I lost my mind. You lost your mind, but you used your hands, he shot back. You made a plan. You executed it. You lived that lie every day for 2 years, looking me in the eye. He shook his head, the finality settling upon him like dust. I cannot look at you. Every time I see you, I will see what you did. I will see the coffin of that small boy. He turned and walked into the room that had been the nursery. He took the small wooden crib he had built with such hope and careful hands, and he dismantled it, the sound of the wrench turning echoing like gunshots. He pulled a small, worn duffel bag from under their bed and began to pack his clothes. Not many, just the essentials. His mechanic's overalls, his few good shirts, the photo of his late parents. Chinello watched from the floor, paralyzed. The reality of her aloneness began to dawn, colder and more absolute than her jealousy had ever been. When he was done, he stood at the front door, the bag at his feet. He did not look at her. "The rent is paid until the end of the quarter," he said, his voice now eerily calm. "After that, you are on your own. Emeka, where will you go?" "Anywhere," he said. "Anywhere that is not here, with the memory of what you have done." He opened the door. The sounds of the awakening street spilled in, a hopeful, living noise that contrasted violently with the death inside. What about us?" Her voice was a child's whimper. He paused, his hand on the doorframe. He finally turned, and his eyes held a sadness so deep it seemed bottomless. "There is no us, Nello. You killed us when you switched those babies. You buried us in that hospital today. I am just now walking away from the grave." He stepped out and closed the door behind him. Not a slam, a soft, definitive click. Inside, Chinello was alone, truly alone. The child she had schemed for was gone, living in a mansion, being reassembled into another woman's son. The child she had been given was dead by a hand of neglect that felt, in that moment, as active as a knife. The husband whose love had been her anchor had just sailed away, leaving her in a sea of her own making. The friend who had been her sister was now a sworn stranger. She had wanted a different life. She had clawed and schemed for it. And now she had it. A life stripped bare. A life of silence. A life where the only company she would keep would be the ghosts of the two boys, one living, one dead, and the echoing, relentless judgment in her own mind. She had returned to a dust more profound than the poverty she had feared. She had engineered her own complete and utter desolation. The room, once filled with the sounds of a struggling but loving family, was now just a hollow box, and she was the only thing left inside, crumbling quietly into regret. The anatomy of regret. The apartment in Ajagunal did not just feel empty, it felt entombed. The silence was no longer an absence of noise, but a presence, a thick, woolen blanket that smothered the echoes of a baby's cry, a husband's deep laugh, the cheerful static of a friend's voice on the phone. Chinello existed within it like a relic in a forgotten museum. The news, as such things do in Lagos, seeped out. It did not make the society pages like Suwa's wedding had. It traveled through the hushed, shocked gossip of the market women, the mechanics in Emeka's old workshop, the teachers at her mother's school. The story morphed with each telling. A jealous witch, a madwoman, a victim of bad luck, but the core truth remained. She had swapped babies, and one had died. The community that had once embraced her as one of their own, who had celebrated her modest wedding and clucked sympathetically over her struggles, now turned its collective back. The once friendly, "Good morning, Mama Chinidu," from neighbors became averted eyes and hurried steps. Her stall in the market became a place of avoidance. Customers drifted to her competitors, not with malice, but with a superstitious unease. Her mother came once, her face aged a decade in a week. She brought food, which sat untouched. She did not ask for explanations. The horror in her eyes was explanation enough. "What poison was in your heart, NWAM?" was all she whispered. Before leaving, her own burden of shame now doubled. Chinello's days became a monotonous hell. She would wake on the thin mattress on the floor. She had sold their bed, unable to bear its emptiness. She would perform the motions of life. Boil water, sweep the floor that never seemed dirty, stare at the wall. The money Emeka left ran out. She sold things, the small television, the standing fan, the extra pots. Each sale was a tiny amputation, a piece of the life she had destroyed being carted away. But the poverty she now lived in was of a different order. Before, poverty had been a shared enemy, a dragon she and Emeka fought together with grit and love. It had been loud, chaotic, full of life and shared struggle. This new poverty was silent, solitary, and absolute. It was not a condition of her wallet, but of her soul. She had no bills to fight because she had no water or light to disconnect. She had no dreams to defer because she had extinguished them all. Her thoughts were her only companions, and they were torturers. They replayed not just the moment of the swap, but every moment that led to it. The childhood envy she had dismissed as childish. The sting of receiving Sua's wedding money. The feel of the cashmere blanket. They replayed, too, the moments after. The sound of her sons, the real Chinidu's, weak cries in the night, cries she had ignored. The sight of his waxy, still face in the hospital bed. The flatline scream. Sua's face, transforming from grief to a horror beyond naming. She would stand for hours at the small window, looking out at the vibrant, teeming life of Ajigunal. The children playing in the dirt, the women hawking, the men arguing politics. It was the same world, but she was no longer in it. She was a ghost watching the living. She had wanted her child to escape this, and in her monstrous attempt, she had not only ensured he would never know it, but had also exiled herself from its simple, human warmth. One afternoon, in a fit of something resembling madness or clarity, she took the remaining money from a sold saucepan and bought a cheap phone and a data plan. Driven by a masochistic compulsion, she found Sua's husband Toby's corporate website. In the news section, buried under financial reports, was a small, tasteful photograph from a recent charity fundraiser. There was Toby, looking solemn and dignified, and there was Sua beside him. She was thinner, her elegance now edged with a new, unyielding strength. And standing between them, holding Sua's hand, was a little boy in a tiny suit. Her son, Chinidu, now Alyawada Balobo again. He was taller. His hair was neatly cut. He was looking at the camera, his expression still serious, but there was a light in his eyes that had not been there in the Stark Hospital lounge. A light of security, of care. Sua's other hand rested protectively on his shoulder. The caption read, Mr. and Mrs. Adeyemi with their son at the Hope for Children Gala. Their son. The words were a final, elegant twist of the knife. Her plan had, in the most grotesque way possible, worked. Her biological son was now irrevocably their son. He was being raised in the lap of luxury, given the best of everything, cherished. He would call Sua a mummy. He would never know the scent of her skin, the sound of her true voice singing him an Igbo lullaby. He was lost to her, and he was thriving. She threw the phone against the wall. It shattered. The brief, illicit window into the life she had coveted slammed shut, leaving her in the dark again. That was the true anatomy of her regret. It was not a single emotion, but a complex, living system within her. It was the bone-deep ache for the child she had borne and abandoned. It was the searing shame of the child she had neglected to death. It was the hollow vacuum where her friendship and marriage had been. It was the bitter irony that her jealous scheme had succeeded only in gifting her enemy with her own flesh and blood, while leaving her with nothing. As the Lagos dusk painted the sky in mournful shades of purple and orange, the same sky that stretched over the Adelabu mansion, Chinelo sat on the floor of her empty room. The last of the sun's rays faded, leaving her in darkness. The poverty she had finally understood was not a lack of money. It was a bankruptcy of spirit. It was a debt incurred not by circumstance, but by choice. A choice born of comparing her garden to another's, and deciding to salt her own earth so her seed could grow in stolen soil. The debt was unpayable. No amount of suffering, no depth of loneliness could bring back the dead child, return the living one, rebuild the burned bridges. All that was left was the eternal, silent service of the dead itself, a life sentence of regret, in a prison built by her own hands, with walls made of envy and bars forged in a moment of unforgivable, twisted love. The only sound was the slow, dry whisper of her own breathing, counting out the endless, empty time. Tell them thanks for watching, share with friends, and subscribe for more videos. The screen fades from the final, dark scene of Chinello alone. It resolves into a simple, clean background. Gentle, thoughtful instrumental music plays softly. Narrator, warm, sincere voice. And that brings us to the end of this story of the Stolen Cradle. A tale of two friends, a bond tested by envy, and choices that changed destinies forever. If this story moved you, made you think, or held you captive until the very end, do us 3 great favors. Thanks for watching. Your time and attention mean everything. Share this video with a friend. Tag someone and ask them, what would you have done? Start a conversation. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We have many more powerful Nigerian stories like this one coming your way. Stories of love, betrayal, ambition, and the true fabric of life. Don't miss the next one. Subscribe. Share. Let's grow this community together.